The moment I realized what kind of birthday it would be was when my daughter-in-law handed me an apron at the front door. Not as a joke. Not with a smile that suggested she knew how it looked. She held it out the way you hand someone a tool they're expected to use, and said the shrimp wouldn't cook itself and the guests were arriving at 7. I stood on the welcome mat of the house I had helped purchase, holding a cotton apron with someone else's kitchen printed on the front, and I thought, all right then. This is what we've become. I tied the apron strings and walked into the kitchen. The house smelled the way it always does when my daughter-in-law entertains. Expensive candles, something citrusy, and the faint undercurrent of effort that goes into making a home look effortless. She is very good at surfaces. Always has been. I had admired that about her once, the way she could arrange a room so that it looked like no one had ever needed anything inside it. It took me years to understand that what I mistook for elegance was simply the careful removal of everything inconvenient, including me. My son had called the week before to remind me about the gathering. His voice had that particular brightness he uses when he needs something and wants it to feel like an invitation. "Mom, it's going to be a real celebration," he said. "Sophie's been asking for you. Make sure you bring the shrimp marinade recipe. Vanessa loves it." I heard the words in the right order and still somehow missed what they meant. I was 67 years old and I could still be fooled by the sound of my own son's voice telling me I was wanted. I cooked for 2.5 hours. The shrimp, the roasted potatoes, the corn salad that Vanessa had texted me about 3 days earlier with a recipe attached, as if I needed her to tell me how to make it. I sliced and stirred and plated while the party noise rose and fell on the other side of the kitchen door. Laughter, glasses clinking, the kind of easy warmth that spreads through a room full of people who have nowhere to be and nothing to worry about. No one came to check on me. My granddaughter Sophie found me eventually. She was 11 and had the quiet attentiveness of a child who notices the things adults choose not to. She slipped through the kitchen door and stood beside me without announcing herself, watching me transfer shrimp onto a serving platter. "Grandma?" she said softly. "Why are you back here?" "Helping out," I told her. She looked at the platter, then at my apron, then back at my face with that particular expression children wear when they know the adult answer and the true answer are not the same thing. She picked up a spoon and stirred the corn salad for a moment without being asked. I didn't tell her to stop. "Is the cake out there?" I asked her. She hesitated. "Yeah, my son had said it was a celebration. My birthday had been 4 days earlier, and we hadn't gathered then because Vanessa had a work event. We'll celebrate properly this weekend," he told me. All together, I carried the shrimp platter out to the dining room. 14 guests turned and smiled the way people smile at a caterer, pleasantly, briefly, then returning to their own conversations. My son looked up from across the table and gave me a thumbs up. Vanessa said, "Oh, perfect," said it right there. The cake was already on the table. 3 tiers, white frosting, and in neat gold lettering across the front, the words, "Congratulations, Vanessa." I looked at my son. He looked at the shrimp. The cake was for Vanessa's promotion. The one she'd gotten 6 weeks ago. They had apparently decided to fold it into this weekend because the timing worked. It made sense logistically. I understood the calendar logic perfectly. What I also understood, standing in front of 14 strangers holding an empty serving tray, was that the birthday my son had promised me had never been planned at all. I took off the apron and folded it over the back of a chair. No one noticed me do it. I said my goodbyes quietly, which is my way. I have never been a woman who makes an exit. I have spent my life leaving rooms without disturbing anything, and that evening was no different except that something inside me was. On the drive home, I didn't turn on the radio. I drove in the particular silence that happens when the mind has finally caught up to something the heart has known for a long time. I had spent 19 years doing the math on my son's life. When his father died, my son was 31 and frightened and carrying more debt than I knew about until the week of the funeral. I did not hesitate. I used a portion of what I'd saved over 30 years of nursing to pay what needed paying, and then I kept going. The down payment on the first house. The cash infusion when his business had a difficult quarter. The car that Vanessa needed because hers had too many miles. The preschool deposit for Sophie, which had come with a 2-week deadline and a note that said it was just until the account cleared. The account never quite cleared. There was always something waiting behind the last something. I was not blind to what was happening. I want to be honest about that. I saw it. I simply chose a softer name for it. I called it family. I called it what parents do. I called it love, which in my experience is the word people reach for most often when they mean that they are afraid of the alternative. I got home that night and sat at the kitchen table without turning on the lights. My house is small and familiar. A 2-bedroom I bought on my own years after my husband passed. Every corner of it holds some small choice I made for myself. The blue lamp I found at the market in Savannah. The quilt my mother left me folded over the back of the couch. A life assembled quietly, piece by piece, without anyone's approval or assistance. I'd forgotten how good it felt to be surrounded by only what I had chosen. I thought about the apron. Not as a symbol. I am not a woman who likes symbols, but as a fact. The simple logistical fact that my daughter-in-law had known before I arrived that I would be cooking. She had planned for it. She had withheld that information from me the way you withhold information from someone you expect to comply rather than consent, and I had complied. Without a word, because that had become the natural order of things. I opened my laptop and looked at my bank account. The automatic transfer I had set up 3 years ago moved $600 each month into the household account my son and I shared as a secondary signer arrangement. A safety net I had told the bank when I arranged it. For emergencies. There had been a long string of emergencies since then, and not one of them had required my son to change his grocery budget or cancel a subscription or sit with the discomfort of a week without easy money. I closed the laptop without touching anything. Not because I had changed my mind. Because I had learned a long time ago that the best decisions don't require rushing. I slept better than I expected. The next morning was a Tuesday in October, which is my favorite kind of morning. The light comes in low, and the air outside carries a dry crispness that smells like the season changing its mind. I made coffee and sat with it at the kitchen window for a long while, watching a squirrel work the oak tree in my backyard with the focused urgency of something that understands winter is coming. I have always appreciated animals that prepare. I got dressed in a navy cardigan and my good walking shoes, not because I was going far, but because the occasion felt like it called for something intentional. I took the folder from my desk drawer, the one I keep for important documents. I'd been putting off this particular errand for longer than made sense. But some things require the right morning, and this was it. The credit union was 3 miles from my house and opened at 9. I arrived at 8:45, which gave me time to sit in my car and watch the morning move. A mother walked by with a stroller. A man in a postal uniform sorted a bag on the hood of his truck. Ordinary life proceeding in its ordinary way, entirely indifferent to the fact that I was sitting in a parking lot getting ready to change mine. I went inside when the doors unlocked. I asked for the branch manager, a woman named Patricia, who had helped me set up the transfer arrangement 3 years earlier. She was the kind of professional who remembered details, and she remembered me. "Mrs. Calloway," she said, extending her hand. "What can I do for you?" I told her what I needed. She asked a few clarifying questions without alarm or judgment, the kind of questions designed to confirm that the person across the desk is acting freely and not under pressure. I had rehearsed my answers, not because they were untrue, but because I wanted to say them clearly. No one is pressuring me. I am not in danger. I have simply decided that this arrangement no longer reflects my intentions. She processed everything with efficient calm. The transfer suspended, then scheduled for removal at the end of the billing cycle. My secondary authorization on my son's attached account revoked. The one credit card I had added him to at his request 5 years ago flagged for cancellation. It took 40 minutes and a signature. That was all it required. 40 minutes to undo 19 years of accumulation. 40 minutes to stop being a resource and become a person again. Outside, the October air hit me with the same dry crispness it had promised all morning. I walked to my car slowly, not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted to feel the weight of the choice fully. My husband used to say that good decisions feel like putting down a bag you forgot you were carrying. He was right about most things. I drove home without stopping. The afternoon passed quietly. I watered my plants, answered some emails from my friend Beverly, started a pot of soup that didn't need to be done until dinner. Around 4, my phone lit up on the counter with my son's name. I let it ring. Not out of anger. Anger makes noise, and I was not interested in noise. I simply let the call pass the way you let a train pass when you're not the one it's stopping for. The voicemail icon appeared. I left it unread. 2 more calls followed within the hour. Vanessa's name the second time. My son again the third. Then a text message that I could see the preview of without opening. The card isn't working. Can you call the bank? I made my soup. I ate it at the kitchen table with the radio on low and the windows darkening outside as the evening came in. There is a particular quality of peace that belongs to people who have finally stopped waiting for a problem to solve itself. I had not realized how long I had been waiting. The texts came through the evening in irregular intervals, the way distress tends to arrive. Not all at once, but in waves. The first wave was confusion. The second was irritation dressed as concern. Mom, this is a billing issue you need to handle. Then, by 8 o'clock, something closer to actual alarm. The mortgage auto payment didn't go through. We need to talk about this tonight. Tonight. As if I were available on demand, the way I had always made myself available on demand. I turned my phone face down on the nightstand and read my book until 10. The call that woke me the following morning was from a number I recognized but hadn't expected. My sister Carol, who lives in Portland and calls on Sundays and birthdays and rarely in between. I answered before I was fully awake. Margaret, she said. Daniel called me last night. I sat up slowly, feeling the familiar protest in my lower back. What did he say? She paused. More than he should have, probably. She had always been that way. Careful with words the way someone is careful with matches. He said you did something drastic and you won't talk to him. It isn't drastic, I told her. It just looks that way from where he's standing. Another pause. Longer. I know, she said. I know it does. Margaret, I've watched you cover for that boy since Robert passed. I should have said something years ago. I didn't, and that's on me. I was quiet for a moment. You don't have to apologize for something that wasn't yours to fix. Maybe not, she said. But I want you to know I'm on your side, whatever you need. She paused again. He told me about the birthday. The cake. She let the sentence end there, which was the most elegant thing she could have done. We talked for a while, the two of us, in the unhurried way of women who have known each other long enough to trust the silences. She made me laugh once, which I had not expected. Before we said goodbye, she told me to call her any time. She said it the way she meant it, which is the only way Carol says anything. The morning after that phone call, Sophie showed up at my door before school. She stood on my porch in her green jacket with her backpack hanging off one shoulder and an expression on her face that did not belong to an 11-year-old. She looked like someone who had made a decision and was honoring it. Can I come in, Grandma? I have a few minutes before the bus. Of course you can, I told her. She sat at my kitchen table and watched me pour orange juice into 2 glasses with the focused attention of a child who has something to say but isn't sure yet how to start. I set 1 glass in front of her and sat down with my coffee. I let her take her time. Is it because of the party? She asked finally. I considered how to answer her. Sophie is the kind of person who grows toward honesty the way plants grow toward windows. Lying to her would not only fail, it would cost something. Partly, I said. It's because of a lot of things that happened before the party, and that night was just the last of them. She looked at her juice. Mom and Dad are upset. I know. Dad was on the phone for a long time last night. She traced the edge of the glass with her finger. He was talking to Grandpa Joe, saying you did something bad. I thought about that. I don't think it was bad. What do you think it was? I asked her. She was quiet for a long moment. I think it was like when you've asked someone to stop doing something and they don't stop, so eventually you just stop letting them. She looked up at me. Is that right? That's very right, I told her. She finished her juice. Before she left, she hugged me tightly, one arm crooked with her backpack still on, and said, "You didn't look happy at the party. You haven't looked happy in a while. I thought you should know somebody noticed." After she went, I stayed at the kitchen table for a long time. The October light was coming through the window in that low, honest way it does, and the house was very still. Children carry a particular kind of truth that adults have spent decades learning how to bury. It is one of the few genuine privileges of grandparenthood, being trusted with the version of the truth someone has not yet been taught to soften. The calls from my son continued through the week, shifting in tone the way the weather shifts before a storm. First confusion, then frustration, then a long text on Thursday that I read carefully before setting my phone down without responding. The text asked me what he was supposed to do now. It used the word responsible 4 times. It did not once ask how I was. On Friday afternoon, his car pulled into my driveway. I watched from the kitchen window as he sat behind the wheel for a few minutes before getting out. He walked to my door with his hands in his jacket pockets and his shoulders in that position they take when he is preparing for something he does not want to do. I had raised him. I knew his posture the way I knew the sound of his voice at age 6, when he'd fallen from the oak tree in our old backyard. He knocked twice, which was new. He used to just open the door. I let him in. He looked around my living room the way people look around a place they have stopped truly seeing and are suddenly, for one reason or another, being asked to see again. He looked at the photographs on the mantel, the quilt on the couch, the blue lamp from Savannah that he had probably not registered once in 15 years of walking past it. "Mom," he said, his voice landing somewhere between frustration and something more fragile. "We need to talk about what's happening." I sat in my chair and folded my hands in my lap. I didn't offer him anything to drink. Some conversations shouldn't be made comfortable before they've been finished. He stood for a moment, then sat on the edge of the couch. He did not lean back. "The mortgage company called us," he said. 3 times. "They've added a late fee. Vanessa's car insurance lapsed. The school is sending home notices about Sophie's account." He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. "I can't manage all of this at once without—" he hesitated. "Without me," I finished. He looked at me, "without knowing what happened." "I know what happened," I said. "I removed myself from financial arrangements that should never have existed in the first place." He shook his head, and I could see the argument assembling behind his eyes, the practiced one about responsibility and family and what fathers do, which in his case was extend to mothers as well, since his father had died and left me to fill both roles. He'd been borrowing against that grief for nearly a decade. "You didn't give us any warning," he said. "Did you give me warning about the birthday?" I asked. The question landed. I watched it land. He was quiet for a moment. Longer than I expected. "That wasn't," he started. "Wasn't what?" I asked. I kept my voice level. I was not angry anymore. I had moved through angry somewhere around the 3rd unanswered phone call and come out the other side into something quieter and more permanent. Wasn't intentional? Most things that hurt don't require intention. They only require intention. They only require not paying attention. He was silent. "I have paid for things for 19 years, I told him. "Your father's hospital bills, your first house, 3 rounds of debt that you called temporary, Sophie's school, which I love paying for and would have continued if I'd been asked rather than assumed. I have paid and covered and arranged and absorbed without complaint because I believed that was what love required. I was wrong about that." His jaw tightened, then loosened. He looked at his hands. "I spent my birthday cooking shrimp for your wife's promotion party," I said. There was no edge in my voice when I said it. Just the fact. He closed his eyes briefly. "We should have done something separate for your birthday. I know that. Vanessa, the timing, I said, was never going to work out for me. That has been true for a while now." He didn't argue. That was new. For a long, quiet moment, we sat across from each other in my small living room. with the afternoon light moving across the floor and the faint sound of a neighbor's lawnmower somewhere outside. I thought of him at 8 years old, sitting in this same kind of chair in a different house, reading a library book with one sock on and one sock off because he always lost them. I thought of the man he had become, not a bad man, never a bad man, just one who had learned to take comfort for granted because it had always been reliably available. That is not entirely his failing. I had made myself reliable to my own detriment and then silently resented him for leaning on what I held steady. That is a harder truth to sit with than the simple one about ungrateful children. The harder truth is that I had taught him what to expect of me, and he had simply learned the lesson. I was not going to tell him that. Not tonight. Some understandings have to arrive on their own, or they don't stick. "What do you need from me?" he asked eventually. The question was genuine. I could hear it. "Nothing," I said. "That's the whole point. I need you to understand that I don't need anything from you, and you, no longer have anything coming from me. And what I want," I added, "is for you to learn to live your life with what you actually have, not with what you've been borrowing from mine." He nodded slowly, the kind of nod that isn't agreement yet, but is the first motion toward it. "I don't want to lose you," he said. His voice had gone thin. "You haven't lost me," I told him. "I've just stopped being a service and gone back to being your mother. There's a difference." He sat with that for a while. Then he stood up, and for a moment he looked at me the way he hadn't looked at me in years, not past me, not through me, not around me, toward whatever he needed next, but at me, just at me. Margaret Calloway, his mother, a woman with a life and a kitchen window and a quilt from her own mother and 67 years of things he had not bothered to ask about. He left without saying much else. I heard his car pull away, careful this time rather than sharp. I sat in the quiet he left behind and let it settle the way good quiet settles, like something finally in its right place. The following week, I made an appointment with my attorney, a practical woman named Joan who had been handling my affairs since I bought this house. I updated my will. Everything I have goes to Sophie, held in trust until she turns 25, managed by Joan's firm in the meantime. I left a small amount to a nursing scholarship at the hospital where I worked for 26 years. The rest is Sophie's to use for education or a down payment or whatever she needs when she is old enough to need it, without expecting anyone else to hand it over. I did not agonize over the decision. I had been moving toward it for longer than I knew. Joan asked me once if I was sure. I told her what I had told the bank manager. I am not in danger, I am not confused, and I am not being unkind. I am being accurate. She accepted that, capped her pen, and moved to the next form. Outside her office, the October afternoon had turned cool and sharp, the kind of day that smells like wood smoke and dried leaves, and the particular honesty that comes when the year begins to run out of warmth. I walked to my car slowly, the way I always walk now, not from weakness, but from choice. There is a difference, at my stage of life, between moving through the world and actually inhabiting it. I had been moving for too long. Sophie called me that Sunday. She had talked her way into using her mother's phone, which I chose not to ask about. She wanted to know if I was all right and whether I needed anything from the grocery store because her father was going and she had written a list and there was room on it. I told her I was fine. I told her she was more than I deserved. She told me that was not how it worked, that grandmothers didn't have to deserve anything. They just had to be there. I did not argue with that. A few weeks passed. The calls from my son became less frequent, then took on a different character, less urgent, more ordinary. He called on a Thursday to ask about a recipe, which is a thing he had not done in years. We talked for 20 minutes about chicken and also about nothing in particular, which is a kind of conversation I had missed. I did not bring up the money or the birthday or the apron. Some things are better left to live in the space between people, reminding them quietly without needing to be named. Vanessa sent a note, an actual handwritten note, which surprised me enough that I read it 3 times. She wrote that she knew things had been hard and that she had not always been thoughtful, and that she hoped in time we might find a better way. It was not an apology exactly. It was something more careful than an apology, and perhaps more honest for that. I put it on my mantle for a week before I moved it to the drawer. I had not decided yet what to do with it, but I had not thrown it away. The morning I want to end on is a Tuesday in November, about a month after all of this began. The early kind of morning, barely light yet, with frost on the lawn and the oak tree in my backyard holding its last few leaves the way old things hold their last of anything, with a certain fierce and uncomplaining dignity. I made my coffee and stood at the kitchen window with both hands around the mug. My lower back ached the way it always does when the temperature drops. The squirrel was back in the oak tree, busy and entirely unaware of being observed. My phone was on the counter. 3 unread messages from Carol, a photo Sophie had sent the night before of a drawing she'd made in art class, and a voicemail from my son that I hadn't listened to yet. I would get to it. There was no urgency now, and that absence of urgency was, after so many years of constant urgency, the most remarkable feeling in my life. I thought about the apron hanging back on its hook in my son's kitchen. I thought about the cake with someone else's name on it, and the shrimp platter, and the drive home through the dark with the radio off. I thought about signing my name at the bank and not trembling. I thought about Sophie at my kitchen table saying, "You haven't looked happy in a while," and I thought about the way that sentence landed, like a small key turning in a very old lock. I am not a woman who makes speeches. I did not stand at any podium and announce that I had reclaimed myself. There was no dramatic moment, no scene worth filming. There was only a series of small, deliberate choices made by a woman who finally understood that taking care of yourself is not the opposite of love. It is simply love directed at someone who has been waiting a very long time to receive it. My coffee was warm. The oak tree held its last leaves. The morning was mine. If you have been the person in that kitchen, the one cooking while the party happens on the other side of the door, the one whose name doesn't make the cake, the one who signs the checks no one says thank you for, then I hope this morning reaches you. You are allowed to put down what you have been carrying. You are allowed to take up space in your own life. And you are allowed to love your family from a place of wholeness, rather than from what is left of you after everyone else has taken what they need. Stay close. There are more stories to tell, and I would be honored to share them with you.